your official TA for this class, and I have a couple of announcements for those here and online and on SITN. We would like to let everybody know that there are new announcements coming up that we're posting online, www.bootstrap.org/colloquium, and we suggest that you might want to visit this regularly because we're posting any number of announcements there, including a news section, and there's also a discussion group there so that you can get involved in the more interactive activities that go along with this colloquium. We would very much like to ask that everybody fill out the questionnaire forms so that we can tune the next session after each one has occurred. We have tried not to send too many mailers, email, physical mail, and so on, to just post on our website because we feel that everybody has more than enough email messages as is. So please cooperate with us, and we'll try to improve on the colloquium as we go along. Another announcement is that we're reopening the registration for the on-site colloquium here, physically at Stanford, because we have had some dropouts, so we're opening it up slightly, and we don't mind having it be a full house continuously. So those who would like to attend here in person, feel free to apply. We'll try to keep the house full at all times. There's another request that we've had for PowerPoint files of what we've presented in the past. We will try to post these online also. We haven't had the capability to do it so far, but we'll try to do it, and we'll do it through the OneList file sharing capability that we have. And let's see, if you don't have any other reason to subscribe to the OneList forum, this would be a good incentive. And besides that, let's see, for those who cannot get the webcast particularly well, we have faced some quality problems. We have some information on this on the Colloquium homepage. So if you have problems, please read that and then contact us with additional queries if you have problems still. And that's pretty much what we have for announcements, unless Peter has, no? Okay. And then I turn it back to Doug, who will take it away from here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo. You know, this whole colloquium thing's been planned since last spring, and none of us appreciated what it would involve as coordination and effort, and it seemed like a good idea that we would open our own repository and ask for things, and then we get flooded. And so all I want to say is if you contribute into that dialogue and aren't getting any response, please don't get discouraged. We have to muster the resources and the people, but it's one of the goals of this whole event is to see if we could make something real happen like that. And as I'll say over and over again, if I have my head clear about it during this colloquium, that how to build and run a really effective dynamic knowledge repository is something that I don't think anybody knows what it will take to do it. And the first times when people get one really working in any significant scale at all, it may cost about 20 times what anyone would believe ought to. But that's the whole engineering approach, is to get in and do it. And I don't think any kind of research is ever going to do it other than actually building it, making it work. And anyway, so I think that the whole thing about this worldwide bootstrapping is something that makes the journey to the moon look like a Boy Scout trip. All right. So some people accuse me of, I make it sound so big that when I fail, I'll have a reason. So why didn't I think of that? All right, let's get going in our session 4. The orientation here is about technology, but what I really would like to do is there's sort of a scale up and down about the involvement and the impact of the emergent technology within and upon society's augmentation systems. I want to just quickly kind of look at that and then do kind of a conceptual overview of, best I can call it, as kind of architecture of the environment about how people are going to sort of be able to work with the technology there. And then we work and sort of towards a takeoff position about what this sort of push can be. And we have some really interesting people here that can then come on and talk to you today about that. And incidentally, I want to tell you about, we have some visitors. There's a really good friend of mine from Japan, Marlene Melicott, is here. And she's the significant other of Ted Nelson, if you ever heard of him. And I charge her with getting Ted up on his feet in the last 10 years. She's a great gal. So she's sitting back there acting innocent or blushing. And then next to her are two people from Australia that are longtime associates of Ted Nelson's working too. And I'll introduce a couple other people later on, but I wanted to say especially hi to Marlene and her buddies. Okay, there are a lot of experiences that have sort of molded me and hammered me, etc., through the years. That, and I've repeatedly told you about the impact of prevailing paradigms on how the world sees and hears what you say. It's really interesting. So there's a lot of experience, and there are publications, and there are some really effective ones on the web. And I'm going to give you some snapshots of those so that you can get a chance of going back in there like that. And then the general images of what this Kodiak process, the sort of concurrently developing, integrating, and applying knowledge, that name evolved sort of because just calling it collective IQ or a repository didn't sort of indicate that what we're really talking about are the capabilities involved in doing that. So that's what the Kodiak acronym stands for. It's the set of capabilities that seems critical. And it may be we have to somehow introduce more terms than concurrent and development and integration and application in order to be consistent about it. But it was just a name that did some good too. So this open hyperdocument system that we talk about more and more today and here is sort of the focus on the emergent technologies that will help provide the kind of support for Kodiak that we're talking about. And in the end, that will integrate a lot of the things that Ted's done, that a lot of other people have produced and such. And there's no way in which what we talk about is a claim that this is the path. What we talk about is getting a start with the kind of things we've had experience with and know, and using some of the up-to-date kind of environments that are but really the big concentration on getting it started in an environment that will sort of help promote the rational evolution of it. And that sort of goes along with there are no monopolies in that environment. And that all kinds of little niches will form in which evolution of some of these social organisms will start taking place. The thing we think to do for that environment is to give the maximum visibility for every social organism about what's happening out there, so it can sort of decide and guide its own evolution and walking like that. That's the best we can do. So that's why the thing we talk about is the very first important dynamic knowledge repository would sort of have that purpose in there, so that we're doing it. So if it ever gets going, and you guys have helped, then you can feel more satisfied with your career, I'm just sure. Anyway, so I had a bunch of these concepts, and when the research money dried up in the mid-70s, I got gently find that there was no more funds, and SRI couldn't support us with its money, so they would have had to sort of junk the whole system and everything. But a lot of the people got a chance to go over and get jobs at Xerox PARC, but there were 20 some or more that weren't available to that, and we actually managed to get it auctioned off, this system, this NLS system, auctioned off and to a commercial company in Cupertino called Timeshare, TYM Share, and they were one of the very earliest that were producing time-shared services, and they had their own network around the country that was slightly different from the ARPANET, but then they got enough funding to put it sort of merged, so we could sort of be the gateway between them, and so they acquired our stuff from SRI, and so we had then an interesting 6 years from 78 to 84 there. And then McDonnell Douglas, in a spurt of sort of mad optimism, decided it was going to get up a whole business in the information services area. So they set up an information services group and acquired something like $1 billion a year revenue worth of acquisitions to do it. And down in there was Timeshare. And down inside Timeshare was our little group that was horribly named the Office Automation Group. You know how I hate the term automation. But what this provided was a very, very, very interesting and important thing for me, that I could walk into McDonnell Douglas as a cousin rather than as some vendor and start understanding and learning and making friends in there. And it was just extremely good. So there was a subset of people in there that got all turned on to what we were doing, and we actually got some prototypes. Meanwhile, the commercial side was getting customers building up around the country till there were 20-some mainframe servers around the country supporting people. And an Air Force group really started trying to say how would they really go after integrating their office automation and communications among all the air bases in the world. And so they had 5 of those mainframes on their site in Illinois, and were doing things with knowledge management, etc., that were very advanced. And so it would be interesting during all this time to be able to convey enough of the details of what our system could do in order to show you the kind of unique things that would do. So we're not going to get there now, but there's a lot of background in that. And one of the really, really important things was that the corporate vice president for information services at McDonnell Douglas, we kept pushing his doorbell, and he finally said, well, I'll give you a chance. He said, if you can go get this group of people here that was doing a multi-corporation study about the very high altitude advanced aircraft thing that would fly at 100 miles up or something like that. And so if you can get that crew interested in what you're doing, then I'll really listen. So about a year later we came back and said, well, they're interested, they're doing their project management stuff with it, and they're excited as hell and so on. And he said, well, that's the point where he said, well, I'm sorry. He said, I don't think we ought to be in that business. And besides, when I talk around, I find that IBM and DEC and Hewlett-Packard, they don't know anything about this link stuff like that, and I don't see that we ought to. It was too radical. But the lesson learned there about if you're going to get a big project like an aircraft that's got several thousand people in the major contractors environment working on this thing together through all sorts of divisions within the place, and then there's something like 6,000 supplier companies out there. 100 or so have to be very closely involved in the concurrent design of big parts of the thing with the specifications exchange, the requirements and all of that. And it's a huge job. And you look in there and you said, if the kind of collective knowledge work and exchange, etc., that we're talking about has got to take place, the standards for how the knowledge containers are made and how you can interlink between them and follow things and digest it and portray it and all, just have to be much different from just thinking that they buy whatever vendor they think is interesting. So we started trying to talk among the corporate people we could find about something we called an open hyper-document system. And we ran into a problem pretty soon that someone were accusing us that McDonnell Douglas just wanted to sort of get a corner on this, and it wasn't. So about then I decided I could take early retirement. And Christina and her husband helped set up the Bootstrap Institute. We said, let's raise a flag and see if we can get the world going. So that was 11 years ago. And it's been floundering and getting interested in just various ways, et cetera. And that. But so anyway, all through that, this picture of this sort of open hyper-document system and the kind of open standards there'd have to be, it would have to be something that could evolve much more organically than the way it does if you're all depending upon vendors coming out every year or so with their hottest thing. And a year and a half ago when I learned about the open source movement, I said that's just exactly the kind of thing. You have to get the people that are really involved in the proactive use of it to get involved in the evolution. So this has been the plan. So as we talk then about today about some of the technology thing, it's that OHS sort of thing that's in there behind it. And it may sound sort of silly when we sit here, we don't have the world organized, we don't have big vendors or anything behind it, but it's just a clear picture that the people that get involved say, yes, it's what has to happen, so how do we get to happen? So anyway, that changed my perception, and like I say here on this slide, I probably bore you with it, but just please keep with me. Let me come back and tell you some more. So anyway, it's about the standards. So anyway, two areas in the tool system development that seem mutually and basically important about standards. So one is the unambiguous description, naming, and usage of properties of our knowledge containers. There just have to be standards in there. They just have to be, that you can pass these knowledge containers around, and there's standard ways to represent the standard properties, etc., that you're going to have in there. And that's what the World Wide Web Consortium and the XML movement can do about it. And so we're just totally pleased here to have this, what's his name, John Bozak with us, who's been the guy that really got that XML stuff going, etc. So he blesses us with his interest and appearance. Is he hiding here today? Oh, yeah. He's too bashful otherwise. We're going to get him to talk a little later. The second one is unambiguous name, descriptions, etc. Wait a minute. For the functions, the naming and usage of the functions that you can apply to these knowledge containers as you want to navigate between them, look at them in different things, massage them, shape them, put them away, study, access control, etc. So those have to be standards, and the nomenclature has to be the same. We just can't let it be that you say, well, one vendor calls such and so this thing and another calls it that, and it means slightly different. So it's the same way that out in the shop environment out in the world, that drill chucks and shafts and tolerances and material quality, etc., like that, all have standards on them that just have to be there. So that's the kind of thing too, that the tool systems functions. So in this tool system, there's that combination of how the knowledge containers are structured and indexed, and the properties in them are clearly sort of standardized, and then also what are the things you can do with them. So this is a very clear kind of environment about the evolution that has to take care of all that. So anyway, so then vocabulary just raises its head. It's just like there has to be, the standard dictionary and glossary about these tool systems around the world, in whatever language they are, that they have to have the same meaning. So verbs and nouns, say like that. Like, what are the objects you see on the screens when you're doing that? Well, these are so-called related objects that are in the knowledge containers. And then what are the verbs, what you can do about it? So those have to get clearly sort of more and more standard so people can talk about it. And that vocabulary has to be something consciously evolved. And it's got to be in the hands of the end users, which standards groups today are sort of not very much in the hands of end users. That the vendors who are trying to push it out have the eagerness and urge to get out there in the marketplace with that, so they really want to get them settled. But boy, how they're going to impact the way the usage goes within the end user organizations is just very critical. So how do we get an environment for evolving of this thing? That's very critical. And so anyway, going back in our history like that, there was a really interesting paper that I gave in a conference in 1986 and was published, I guess, how could it have been published in 85 if I gave the talk in 86? You just didn't realize how far advanced I am. Anyway, so that paper is online, and it's also in our Augment journal, the given number there. So in Augment, we can just jump to 101.931, boom, and we get a view like this and more stuff like that. But that's got a lot of the history and the chronology of events. It just goes through sort of year by year the kind of things that emerged and the experiences we had. And it's just an important way to get a glimpse of where all this stuff came from. And then in 90, I published a paper called The Knowledge Domain Interoperability in an Open Hyperdocument System, and that's where it just clearly came out and tried to draw the picture of that. So there's a lot in that particular section, that paper. So all these are there by the URL that's at the top up there. And that'll be on the slides that you can get access to later. And then this was the more recent one in 1992, in which really trying to talk about the things like the ABC model and Kodiak, and then the open hyperdocument system, how important it would be, and the general groupware. So there are basic properties in there that are talked about. There are things like saying, look, it's just be ridiculous if you don't have integrated editing and browsing in whatever tool you're using. That you move over to one to browse and then you move over to another edit. That editing and generating and working on documents is a real mixture of moving, shaping, viewing, etc., and massaging. So that, you know, the environment we had was just so integrated. You were just using the linkage and the addressability and stuff just by the minute. And you just go ask Dave Castros here, who lived back. Where'd you go hide? Anyway, so this is. So anyway, these papers give a lot of good background. And then this is a way of looking at it with sort of a modern version of our augment thing that we have. It just went there and looked at this to look at the one particular view, one line only at one level group of the sort of sections in there about mixed object documents, explicitly structuring understandable things, view control, all of that. And view control is so important. And so this is just various views such as Augment itself gives it. And it would be really interesting to demonstrate a lot of these Augment features sometime in here, but the particular medium we're working on can't handle the dynamics of that. And but that would be someday interesting. So with that sort of background, we come to one of my favorite portrayals. And you may possibly remember seeing this once or twice every session. But to me, it's just such an important starting place. It's like saying, hey, look, down here, there are things you're born with, basic human capabilities at the bottom. And those get augmented by a whole array of things. And as you gradually learn to use the different things and the language and the customs and the procedures and all the tools and the environment and the facilities, you gradually acquire a capability infrastructure that's getting more and more competent. And I used to call that a capability hierarchy till it finally dawned on me. And I was giving a talk like this to a group, and some young woman politely raised her hand and says, "It's not really a hierarchy, is it?" And oh, that's right. See? So it really pays to give lots of lectures so nobody knows how much each one is adding to your knowledge. And you know, like that. But the concept of that infrastructure is just extremely important in there like that, that almost any capability at some mid-level depends upon lower level capabilities that you can manage, and these lower level ones are involved in a lot of the higher level ones. And down at the bottom are these very basic human capabilities: sensory, perceptual, cognitive, motor. And there's a very, very important part of that mental thing too, is the unconscious part of that you just aren't aware of, and yet so much of what we think about doing today, we're sort of ignoring what that unconscious can do. Boy, when I go driving in heavy traffic, I just realize, God, there are a lot of stuff that I'm not aware of where the judgment and the decision comes from about whether I'm going to worry about that car and what it's doing or not. Just one look, and I don't know why, what I use to gauge it, but you're depending all the time on things like that. So later on, I'd like to talk more about the thing in here where we say if we have a very different medium in which to do our communicating both ways with the world, and different things that can do sensing and triggering our sensory things, etc., for us, that we can just have a totally different sort of environmental interface that we can adapt to. And then we'll sort of start realizing that the way we do things now and our assumptions of them are based upon the environments we grew up in, and that the language we use evolved in noisy, different kind of environments of all sorts of things. So the very way we choose to have words and express them, and how long it takes to do it, and how much time it gives the listener to adapt to it in the environments, is all evolved in that sense. So then you say, wait, I can have an interface that can be a much crisper sort of thing, with much, much clearer ways to access things and feed them back. How can I then learn to start connecting what machinery I've got in here to the outside world? And that image has been with me since 1960 of saying, that's what's there to go after. So how do we get changing the paradigm a little bit of the easy to learn and natural to use world of today, that's saying it's easy to learn for people with the kind of backgrounds we've had, and natural to use when you learn how to use it, that's not that much different from what you've been used to. So we've got to have an evolvable way. So the way in which you bring in and introduce evolving tool systems in the world has a big, big effect upon what that evolutionary opportunity is. So that's, I'll keep coming back to that over and over again, and it gets very irksome to some people who want to start doing something, and I'll say, oh, but, you know, if we did it this way, it would give us a longer term evolutionary sort of advantage. And we need every advantage we can get. So something we were talking about before is if we take this and really realize the tool system and the human system are very definite systems themselves, and they are intimately intertwined inside the capability infrastructure. That interdependence is very high, and you just can't come and independently make significant changes in the tool system. It's just going to change the capability around it here, which will cause for changes and requirements over in the human system in order to take advantage. It's going like, So this picture holds for one individual, like you, but also holds for whatever team you're with. This capability there is that social organism there has got this in the team. So almost any social organism there is, you can look at that same model and say, and then that starts really giving you the impact of saying, Jesus, readapting that infrastructure among all those interdependent social organisms and institutions out there, and they all simultaneously are going to start evolving at rates they never have before. And so that co-evolution of all of that is just going to be a big challenge, and it has to be recognized. So it's not only a co-evolution for any individual between the tool and the human system, it's the co-evolution between you and the organization you work in. And it's a co-evolution between that organization and its external environments, and on up the line. It's the co-evolution of governments, nations, human. So anyway, so it's that challenge. So when you talk about strategies, it's thinking about any chance to having a valid way to go after that kind of evolutionary thing in a sensible way. So it really deserves some attention about the strategy. So then we say, if you look at very simplified the tool system as it evolves in the world, and the human system as it evolves, it gives you this very, very crude two-dimensional picture. And you say crude, it means that each one of those dimensions here is itself a multi-dimension thing. And so that space out there is many, many dimensions and many, many paths out there through it, some of which are going to get all tangled up and some will be more successful than others. So it's a complex thing. And somebody asked me, how did we talk about this little elephant or whale sitting here like this? And that was generated in saying, look, if I went around the world and took each society and plotted how does it fit with how far advanced it is in using technology and how far advanced it is in evolving its human system side, where would they fit? And I just hypothesized that the group of them would sort of make a cluster that shape. And that was when the margin for tools that we could foresee, the tool system was about out here. And so we always were creeping towards something like that where we could see, and we would say, oh, in 20 years, oops, where do we expect the margin? Well, we went on during the earlier presentations to point out that the way the technology is exploding, that anticipatable today are boundaries out there of what the technology will be able to do that you need to start planning for and thinking, that it's a hugely expanded frontier. And in 20 years, wow, so it was much more of a picture of this scale of a frontier. And what we didn't have in there were any point about, hey, where do we want to get little outposts? You know, groups of people that are moved out there and learn how to live. So we call that. And so there's something I'll talk about over and over again in the next weeks too, is high performance teams. That this is what my recommendation for how you go about getting outposts. And then what about those high performance teams? How are they going to be able to do you any good? And it's just not the kind of thing where somebody lives in a dome that all's isolated and shows, look what they can do for this time. That these people, to really be effective, they have to be out there in what they can do and how they work together, but they have to be part of the ongoing social structures of today in order to be real life and engineering. So that means what kind of tools can they have that are way advanced out here so that they can work within the same environment? Well, that comes right back to the knowledge containers they can use. You could push ahead with characteristics your knowledge containers can hold, etc., which are beyond what the sort of pedestrian users of the day would employ, but the high-performance ones can really zing and work with it. And if they can work on the same knowledge domains among the people, then they're there for people to watch and say, God, how did you do that? In that little time, you just threw up these views and boom. Well, you see, it's just the way. If you ask for this kind of views and you learn how you can grok it that quickly, and at the same time, you're sort of reaching around to grab the most significant one, and you've got the idea where it wants to go, so you preset your launch and thought, oh, well, I don't understand what you're saying, but wow, is it impressive? How can I learn? Well, you know, you're only a grade 4 pedestrian now. That this is grade 8B kind of stuff, but you can work up. You can go get a 5 in a couple of months and stuff. So I can't imagine any other kind of evolution sort of thing other than something like that. And so when we start looking for a way to start implementing an open hyperdocument system, this has been the kind of thing it is. So by the end of today, we sort of give you some feeling for sort of the potential for what's there today to sort of get started for that. So anyway, so this high performance team is a very, very important, as I said, and they can use special tool system and human system enhancements, but they're operating over the same knowledge domains, and their capabilities are visible to the people around them. So we had things like that back in the 70s, and the shared screen thing, that somebody that was a trainer or supporter, somebody's having trouble, they call them up, bing, 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 let's see your screen. Da, da, da. So now I see what's on your screen. Oh, that's what you're doing? Oh, well, pass me the controls and I'll show you what you can do. And so they could actually adopt then the actual range of tool capability that person had to show them how to do it. But also in that system, I'll show you later, you had the options for setting up what grade of user you were going to be, which was essentially how big and rich was your vocabulary that you'd get in the way of. So looking at some of the basic human capabilities was kind of important for that. So we'll start in that sense. And what we do now today, as I mentioned, evolved a very different environment from what's going to be in the future. So we need to question almost every aspect of custom and sort of skill and way we do things in there. So this is sort of a bet. The professional knowledge worker at 2020 will show definite signs of a basic shift in the way their thoughts transform back and forth between the external and internal medium. And what's more, what would be really interesting is to start taking surveys of what people's assumption is. What are they going to think of us when they look back? So I keep thinking, what do we think of that when we read about the Dark Ages, you know, before 1300 or something like that? And you say, geez, you know, dim, religious, they'd be some baron has them under control, just a very mean life and very dim outlook in the world. Well, I'd be willing to bet that people in 20 years will look back at us now in that sort of pitying way of saying, geez, here they were sitting right on the brink of a frontier, and look what their perception of it was, and that they were still messing around in the old way of thinking. So anyway, I've been embarrassed enough, so it's not going to bother me, but but you kids, it might be different, see. So anyway, this is some of the stuff I worked with back there. I said, look, you know, there's mental structuring going on in your head. And then we got these concepts that we clarified, and we could move around with concepts in our mind. And then we attached symbols to those concepts. And we had a language we could talk about and think with, etc. And there was a guy named Benjamin Whorf who did stuff in language early in America, and I really dug that. He had a Whorfian hypothesis about the worldview of a culture is really limited by the language they employ. And I thought, that's really great. So the worldview of the people now trying to look at the future is very definitely going to be limited by the concepts, etc., that we employ in terms like that. So anyway, we'll get going. And views and portrayals that we've been used to a very limited set in the technologies we've had in the past, the pencils and printers and so on and things like that, whereas the computer can provide us with so many more flexible views to convey things to us, that we have yet to learn how we employ that in our dialogue and thinking. So here's a picture I got of saying, well, here's your basic human, and sensory and perception, and mental operations, and some of it's even conscious. I usually draw the conscious thing in a much smaller circle than this, because I got to be much more aware of how much of what happens to us and within us, etc., is some things that we're just not conscious at all of. The real breakthrough in that for me came when I realized I eat so much more slowly than other people do. Now, why is that? And finally I got to thinking, you know, it just takes me more chews before I'm ready to swallow. Well, what makes you ready to swallow? Are you deciding, oh, 5 chews and I'm ready to swallow, or something? No, it's just something about the comfort of it. So I don't have any idea where that came from, but it's a definite unconscious thing that it just isn't ready to swallow yet. So I'm the last one always, which was a very great handicap in the Navy, and it. So come on, Engelbart, the ship's sinking or something. No, I have to finish. Anyway, so this whole set of concepts is really amazing. And then the time came when that became attached to symbols, which was just a huge, huge advance for us. And then then not only spoken language and gestures, etc., but then when that became a printed language, and just huge changes in the whole world. Well, that change is, qualitatively speaking, sort of akin to what's going to happen, only it's going to be sort of a first wave, and the tidal wave is yet to hit us. The opportunities are just huge for there, I'm sure. So anyway, this thing that became new in our evolution was making an external map of this internal concept structure. And so we did that with all kinds of clumsy tools at the first, and then more and more flexible ones, etc. But the ways in which we employ the actual representation of verbal words, etc., on the paper, etc., was just a direct evolution from that. And we just have a really different possibility now for how we represent it and how we establish it and view it. And just very, very different. So get away from that. So this is a figure that I used to evolve step by step. But this isn't the cathode ray tube over here on the left. This is the human with his sensory perceptual input and his motor output, trying to operate in the world. And he's got a computer support where his language he's using, got computer tools and the processes and methods he employs, that he needs this open-ended vocabulary for actually dealing out there. He's got to have fast concurrent control, because it's very different now from just a pencil or something, because wow, he can fly through space, view it, ship it, and like that, and do things. So he wants fast concurrent control, and we worked at that and back that. He wants to be able to both manipulate the content as well as the structural relationship between the elements in there, which is not just cutting and pasting, it's moving section, da-da-da. So we had a structured files, hierarchically structured, and that we could really manipulate and view within that hierarchy and move very flexibly like that. Integrating text and graphics, of course, allowing for in-file naming and addressing just right from the beginning, of saying you don't want to just be able to have a link or URL that points to a file. You want to be able to talk about any object in it explicitly without any ambiguity. So we got a whole bunch of flexible ways in which we did that, including the way in which we says, oh, you keep in a named place in your directory a branch with a certain label on it, and there's a link in there that you're going to keep up to date all the time, pointing to the latest something or other out there. And all I have to do is have my link, whose specification is go to that place and take that link. So in the address, there's a definite place for it taking another link. In fact, that can be strung indefinitely in ours environment. So it has a flexibility. Programmers use that all the time inside the computer. They call it indirect addressing. So we had this indirect linking. So we just use it all the time, and we keep saying, boy, would that ever be valuable out there in the world today? All right, let's learn how we can set up a sort of a structure for early prototype of an OHS that we provide for that sort of stuff. So things have come together that I think we can tell you about that if I stop talking so much. So anyway, computer storage, positions in the file being very important with remote jumps and manipulations, generating all sorts of optional views was very basic, so we only got a certain number of them at the time before we got shut out from the research, and then displaying, and you show it back to your perceptual machinery, etc. And at the same time you could show it to other people, so we've been doing that since '74. So there was a lot of experience that was being used, not just as a demo thing at all, but that's the way we worked. We did all our programming, all our user guides, all our requirements, our specs, communications, field support, everything like that. And there are more things than that too that we could talk about. So this is just giving an example that every object in a file was addressable, and that the actual structure, since space in the computer was so limited compared to today, that a very efficient way to do that was actually to have all these little cells that could be interlinked very flexibly, and each one of them would point to a respective set of text or graphics. So that represented the hierarchy, and moving things around just meant changing pointers in here. So this is sort of an option for databases that got, anyway, but it just was a very intent thing. We made this thing we called the journal. Got it running in 1970. So here's the process. You want to submit a document. It was going into a repository and be cataloged. So you had a document that you were ready. You prepared a submittal form, and in one place in there was a link to the document you want to submit. And then in that submittal form there are fields, like you can say, look, what kind of access control do I want on this? Who do I want to get announcements, etc. about it? This supersedes some other document. Yeah, which one? It's part of a string of documents beginning with what, etc. So there were quite a few fields in there that were part of it. And when you submitted it, boom, that document was put in here in this repository and just guaranteed that it was never going to get changed. That if ever you went to get it again, it would be as it was installed at that time. And also there was an announcement form and an email that went to everybody you wanted to say, hey, this has just been journaled, and included in there is a link. Click, boom. So you didn't send a document, you just sent this little announcement. And if one of these documents had been superseded, every time you jump to it on some link, before it came to you, you get an announcement, it's been superseded. You want the new one or the old one. And there were even ways in which you could track that any given passage in one document, you could go find it, that same one and the next one, in a very direct way without saying it had been rearranged in where it was structurally in the document, but it didn't matter, you could go find it. So there are a lot of things in there that we learned and worked with that we just love to build prototypes like that and the world starts seeing, because it really just changed the way the dialogue went on very much. And one of the changes was, interesting enough, everybody felt a little reluctant to install something on a permanent basis like that. And one guy had such a hang-up to it that he never ever could. He would just stammer and says, I don't know, but I just can't make up my mind. It's not ready to be permanent yet. It was a very interesting social problem in this evolution. But anyway, so what I did then is I realized we brought out our first form of email at the same time that this was inaugurated in 1970. And so I just put a padlock on email. I said, the only way you're going to communicate is through the journal. You mean everything I put in is going to be permanent? Right, until we learn to use it. And so back in there in that old journal records, which some of the tapes are still there about what went on, is things like, who's going to meet me at the beer place tonight for pizza or something like this? So we said, sure. So it got natural. And even software guys, can you imagine, after they had a design meeting, they'd say, okay, who's going to journal the notes? It was just a matter of course. So it's a very important thing that we have to get involved in this. And controlling the views, as we've said. So this just, in a paper that's a very important reading thing of augment provisions in there. It's in the OAD journal, it's number 2250. And this address right up here said go to branch 7 in that. And then after the colon are some characters that tell explicitly what kind of view you want in there. It says all levels, turn on the numbers, and show all the text in every paragraph, and get a blank line in between them. So boom, that's what you'd see. If the next view I says, oh, EBT, so that means I want that level and one line below it only, and only one line each paragraph and one level below it, see? And so, oh, that's what you'd see in the next time, see? And if you want the next view, it says ZG, that says, oh, I want to close no blank line between it, and I only want to look at what's underneath 7. So bingo, that's what you'd see. So they're just very flexible, and the kind of encoding of that sounded Baroque, etc., but it took me a whole weekend to design all that stuff, and it was efficient for a given reason. But everybody learned it, and just quick, and especially the way we had to control it with the left hand, just very fast, so it made a big, big difference.
You were using the coding keyboard?
Yeah. I should, I'd love to show that to you guys sometime. How do you demonstrate it? I could just wave it at you, I guess. Right. But anyway, that's just part of what you can learn. But that's part of what got us dumped, because everybody would look at all that and says, good God, that's not the way to automate secretaries. But we found you could bring in somebody from a temp unit, and within an hour they could be working, because we also will show you the vocabulary. We could set them up a very limited, simple vocabulary in there, just that's all they'd see. So any more views, enough of that. And then we also had this thing of external documents, which if your system's going to work, it isn't just fancy online. So as long as you've got objects that are external, etc., hey, why not keep track of them too? So you'd get this kind of arrangement with mail, shared files, the journal things that are permanent, and your externals. So external documents, what you do is catalog them, and they'd be in the same catalog. So that would mean that in there you can tell what's pointing to what. So it says, oh, if in here you were talking about a given paper or something like that, that citation discussion would show up in the external document cataloging, which means you're starting to get control about the interaction and all of that, which was very worthwhile. So unfortunately I could never build up enough enthusiasm that kept trying to get started but then got aborted, because either internal software guys were never very hot about trying to do some of the things we wanted to do. So that, anyway. So then we talked about the intelligence system that we're having, that part of the dynamic repository in the tool system has to support it. So external document control is just a very interesting part about what you got in that. And so he says, okay, that part of intelligence would have things in mail, shared files, journal, and xdoc would all be part of what you're collecting about what's going on in the outside world that would be valuable and interesting. So you see, and the same time that the what we call the handbook, when I put up these 3 modules of the dynamic repository, there's recorded dialogue, external intelligence, and what we call knowledge product. And for many years, what we called that knowledge product thing was the handbook. We likened it to saying that at any one given time is like it's an online handbook that you can go look and find explicitly what the current state of some kind of knowledge, argument, principle, issue, budget, etc. is. And that dynamically those things were trying to be kept update just like you try to do that. So anyway, so how do you do the handbook? Well, that a lot of times we'd say if it's really the current state and you nailed it down, it ought to be in the journal. Was a look at that. So these were the perceptions about that. So within McDonnell Douglas and that thing we did for the National Aerospace Program is really went to work showing how inside of this they can move around inside the documents of this, and how flexible it was to cross-link between them, etc., in any argument, and how flexible it was to make status reports every week. And they just ended up showing how they could do it. And at any given time a status report would come out and it would link to prior status reports and other things like that. And they would automatically, there were a really interesting macro system there that would gather them together as soon as they got there, put them together in a particular way, and journal it. So every week there was a journal status report that was the integral one that could point unerringly to every one of the prior ones that was ever there, and any critical discussion that came about. And boy, they just loved it. So when we got canceled out about that, they said, all right, we'll do it with whatever IBM's system was at the time. I've forgotten the name of it, but they worked on that. 4 guys worked on that for months. It never got, pardon?
Oh, it was IMS.
No, it was before that. Anyway. So, And the kind of, we began talking about an augmented knowledge workshop. So there, if you really look at how any effective workshop works in industry or something like that, you realize, yeah, there are a set of tools and the materials have to come in standards too to get them involved like that. And there are all the standards for how you describe how you're going to shape or surface or plate or something about something. And so it's very much, you say, we got a knowledge workshop and we have to evolve that. And there are workshops for communities, which are somewhat different from your private one or one for a close order team. And so anyway, so we talked about the way in which they evolved and all of that. So these are things that are there in the literature. And a workshop utility service was something that in 1973 we started specifying. And by 1974 we actually opened up a research group, opened up almost like a commercial support service that people that were on the ARPANET, which were mostly government then at the time, could subscribe, and they'd have to pay us money for the service and they could start learning how to do it. So this is one of the things that got us in trouble, because that's not research, but boy, if you're going to climb the hill we're talking about, that's what you have to do. And so there are many things that we did in that were very exciting. So anyway, these are all the things about augmented knowledge workshops. So quite a bit of talking in the 80s about that, which are there. So all of that history and orientation about the workshop thing and the coevolution, etc., all of that is sort of wrapped up in the approach being sort of formulated and pictured for how the evolution of an open hyperdocument system should take place. See? And so then we start thinking too a little bit more basically. So, you know, we tell people, look, here's your computer and here's your terminal, and the computer may be embedded in your terminal, of course, but everything you do with your mouse or pointing or keyboards or something like that goes into the operating system, and it communicates it to the application program. And if the application program wants to work on files, it uses the operating system to communicate with files and such like that, or with the outside world. So we got those two domains, so people are used to talking about, and out there Microsoft has got the Windows operating system and then all its applications, the Word and XML, all its stuff, spreadsheets and so on. And Unix has its own operating system and then its languages thing. So anyway, this is a good enough world. Okay, that's important. But let's look that application program has these two kinds of functions. One is how it interacts with you, the user, and the other is how it does the work it's supposed to do. And we say, okay, the front end and the back end. Well, why don't we separate those? So, okay, in name it's easy enough to separate them, but why not we just do that in an isolated package? And then why don't we think about this general front end like this? That's how we use that to interact with any of the applications. So this is sort of the model that we were building in our system, and it's what I really think is going to be important in the OHS world. Because, and there you've got not only the kind of documents you're thinking of today and spreadsheets, but you've got to work with people that are doing big complex modeling for economic systems, or the complex computer-aided design they're doing for all sorts of specialized domains. Those have to be interfaced in the same way to point to things, talk about them, work with them together. So this is the kind of thing we're talking about too. And so when we're talking, I suddenly realized I was supposed to be at a certain place at a certain time in this slide presentation, and I don't know who's keeping my. Where'd Marcelo go? Oh well. So anyway, so when we ever get to talking about that, you'll see how the formulation for me is very important. So we're picking out a technology that's available today that can really help us do that in really interesting ways, and be talking about that. And so the system we built was like that. We had a whole separate module we called the user interface system, and it was separate enough that it had a communication channel, this procedure call interface, through the network to the server, so they could be sitting in the same machine or the different ones. And so what happened in here, taking care of all that control? Well, you had a virtual terminal controller that, depended on what kind of terminal you were, it would hook itself with a terminal characteristic file so it could deal the way it could with your So for instance, a typewriter or a two-dimensional display or things like that. And today there's a wider variety too, so great. And then everything that came through from that terminal, when it sort of cleaned it up so that it was a user input, would be passed to this command language interpreter that would interpret what that was doing and call for support service in the back end or something. Oh, that interpreter. Well, we actually had, at any given time, that interpreter would attach itself to a grammar file that told it what the language, what was coming down the stream and what it was supposed to mean and what you were supposed to do about it. And also to a user profile for that user that said this is how big a language this guy wants, or how he wants to shorten some things or abbreviate this or do that and such like that. So all that led for a real evolution in the flexibility of what you were doing. So you could have very simple grammar and simplified sort of user profile for a newly hired secretary. And then the other guys would pride themselves on how rich they could get, and the grammar would begin to grow. So we got operations, verbs and nouns began to be in there. And incidentally, we settled on explicitly dealing with it as verbs and nouns. And you can do that today too. I want to group that cluster or something. So then how you want to designate any particular object, the noun, and designate what action, what verb you want it to do to it, there's lots of flexibility available in there. So that's the picture I really feel we need to be able to get in the open hyperdocument system too, so that you can really get evolution going in there. Meanwhile, the standards for what's in the file could evolve to keep up with being able to handle the advanced ones, and the simple users wouldn't have to even know those properties are there, because there are properties in our file and stuff that some people never found out about. That every paragraph, for instance, had a record. It said who changed that last and when. See, and everybody had an ident, so it was a simple ident. Well, some of the things we could do is filter. We could turn that on, but we could also filter. Hey, I want to see only those things changed by so-and-so, or within a certain time. Well, that was just because we had all these viewing options. Why not? So almost not many people maybe known how to use it, but in the software world, boy, because all our software was hyperlinked and hypermedia and structured like that too. And so what happens? Oh, we got a bug in something. That's funny, it worked well a month ago. What's happened? Oh, who's been in there in the last month? You go look for a little while and he says, Fred, he was there. Look, just show me everything Fred changed and we'll find the bug. See? So there are things like that have applicability in many places. So why not make a standard provision within the file structure so you can start doing that, so as other people learn more and more about how to employ it, they can. But they don't have to bump into it if they don't want to. So this is the sort of thing that the XML extensions to the HTML documents and stuff provide us with. Oh, we can't have questions. That'll make me... But let's try. We've got to try finding more ways to do dialogue. And so we're thinking about at the end, if I ever get done. Sorry. I'm behind. I got to hurry, so what is it? There must be a joke about that. But so even at the way these two user interface systems could connect, and by 1974 that relationship was any place tying into the environment you wanted, those two things could cross-connect, and both guys are watching what this top showing user was doing. Or you could pass the controls, so the controls came this way through it. Or you could put in 10 or 15 people and pass the controls around between them watching, etc. like that. So we published about shared screen service, and we thought, wow, the world would get excited, but it wasn't until a few years ago that much of that was being able to be done in a conventional way. So anyway, and then if you've got that kind of a thing, you can, almost anybody then pretty soon can learn how to write command scripts, because those things could be fed into the command language interpreter interpreted. And so, boy, we found that one of our women support persons who had no idea how to do accounting was working with a customer person who had no idea, and together they kept working on this thing without telling anybody, and they had a whole accounting system that worked. And they were so proud of it and stuff like that. and it would grind away and consume a huge amount of power and be very, very slow, but it did the job. But so it was hard to scold them about that. But anyway, the power there. So we can tell you and show you some of those we've done sometimes. But all of that's part of designing a system that can evolve. And so we had this thing where we had an interface system, and then the conjecture was going to be, hey, that thing could work out to many kind of application domains, and you got one interface server. So we were trying to do that and reach through here to other kinds of application packages. So in McDonnell Douglas we were trying to talk about going into CAD systems and databases and things of that sort, but we got truncated, that's the word goes in there. But this idea, this intermediate server, and then lo and behold, you know, when was it, a year ago or something, I found out that IBM has a design plan they call the web-based intermediary, WBI Webby. Oh, so now we've got the picture. So the things we sort of formulate about what we want to do include something like that. So a little later, I can't remember when, but when I get there and quit, Jim Spores from IBM is going to give you some pictures about their Webby status and some of the other things that are going to be involved in that sort of. But I wanted to give you the background, so the concepts about where this is coming from, that it's not just some wildly saying, oh, let's everybody get together and build the next open hybrid document system. We got this framework to start with, and it's certainly open for a lot of evolution and improvement, this framework, but there's just a lot of experience out there behind it, and so I'm sure it'll be a very good launching thing for an OHS 1 to 1.5 before everybody else with great ideas and modern evolution, etc. like that will start taking it off, and I'll sort of feel like I'll be sitting there waving at them as they disappear. Or no, as this really interesting story goes, it says, well, I can't talk with you any longer, I must hurry and go, because there they go and I'm their leader. so that's the way it's going to be. So you guys in the world will take this off, and I'll say, well, hey, wait for me, I'm supposed to be your leader. So anyway, in this sort of thing, there's a special relevance of things in there that there's a guy that sneaks into this meeting periodically. He's sitting here today named Neil Scott, and he heads a group called the Archimedes Project at Stanford, and he's part of a group around the world that's really working on trying to help get interfacing for handicapped people into computer systems in the world like that. And so he's furnished the kind of URLs here where you can point to. And would it embarrass you if I pointed at you, Neil? Oh. Okay, so I won't. Oh. It just... I didn't want him... Well, anyway. So Neil doesn't know that what I really position that thing, that is some of the most important research going on in the world. And it's important enough that it helps people with different kind of handicaps in their motor and sensory apparatus, etc. like that, where they can't effectively operate today's interfaces, so they're finding ways to do it. But what it opens a door for us is to just start thinking about, hey, you see somebody that can't move their arms or something like that, with blinking and moving their face a little bit, control the damn computer. And then you realize other people who can't see can sense the braille stuff coming out of there and how fast it is. It's hard to believe. And people getting sign language, so he's getting ways in which they come up with sign things on there, how fast they can communicate. And you're saying, hey, look, we've just not been aware of what people that sort of have normal motor and sensory faculties and stuff, we go along just using them in the same old dumb way that evolved in the past. We got to start thinking about how we can extend the use of the sensory and perceptual and motor things that we've got, and all the unconscious things we can learn, so that we can move ahead. So these guys are making outposts out there that the rest of us got to recognize, see? So I don't tell him that in person because I don't want to embarrass him in person, see? But that's just extremely important. So one of the things he tells me he has, for instance, is a gadget. Did I get it here? Yes. And that is this total access system. So it's a piece of hardware, software, that he can get any of this motor stuff like that together like that, and it can go into any computer and it can pretend like it's the cursor driving mouse and the keyboard actuator, etc., so that it means that whatever that computer's interface is for how you click and move and type and button, etc., like that, it can drive applications. So that means that you could put any interface you want in front of that and drive things. So instead of going down inside the system where you'd like to find a clean application programming interface that they talk about, if the vendors aren't very good about providing that, hey look, you can back out here like this and drive it. So anything that application is capable of doing, you can do. So that's what I think about some of the high performance teams have got to go plead with him for, hey, we've been ignoring you all this time, but hey, let us use that to interface for a while, to experiment with really how we can twitch and wiggle and blink, etc., and grunt and do all these things to sort of how we can drive stuff more effectively. So anyways, these things they're learning, this is what I've been saying, how we can extend our normal sensory motor facilities into more effective utility than we today can even contemplate. So that's just important to be there. So anyway, that total access system is really something to try to get in charge with. And at some time, we can get Neil to show and tell us something maybe, if he's not too embarrassed. So then there's IBM's web-based intermediary, also important advantages. And so we're going to get, in the schedule we did right now is we can bring him in at some time, right? Okay, so we had another schedule, what we were going to do. Well, we were going to put Jerry Glenn on the spot, and someplace in the middle of the night I forgot to do that. So I don't know where Jerry Glenn's slides are. What do you recommend? On the spot, command and control.
I don't need the slides necessarily.
So what'll I do when I get to them later then?
We'll make it up. We'll draw an imaginary...
Okay, let's do, we'll sort of hold up here from that, and Jerry Glenn here, whom you've seen on video twice, coming here talking about his Millennium Project out of the United Nations University. So he's here visiting, and so why not come up and stand here and talk for a while. So you got a handheld mic?
I almost got it rigged up here.
Great.
We're about ready to run out of the tape, I think. So someone from the control room will have to sort of wave, I think.
Oh. Oh.
Huh?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
You had your slides, right?
You don't need the slides. Use your imagination. Silicon Valley, imagination replacing matter.
Just a minute, I'll find it, but go ahead.
That's right. We don't. No, you don't need them. Hi. I guess I was asked to get involved in this because to some degree we're either a guinea pig or a prototype, and I'm not sure which. The Millennium Project is essentially, I guess you've already heard ahead of time, is a beginning of a capacity for humans to think together in a cumulative way, sort of what Doug's been talking about. One of the mechanisms that we use for the, let's see, I should get my notes here. What's he called? I got to learn his vocabulary now. The Dynamic Knowledge Repository. We have a website. Now this is where you use your imagination. Imagine a grid going across the top of the domains. And he talked about having to have certain domains and standards on the domains. So we have certain domains for this. One is human capacity. Another is technological capacity. Another is environmental change and biodiversity and so forth. There's about 5 or 6 of these things. One of them is called integration in whole futures. That's sort of like where things don't always fit. You know, stick them right in that group. And then, so imagine those 6 categories or domains going across the top of your screen. Then imagine coming down the left side of your screen individuals, institutions, and maybe we'll have to add NICs in your vocabulary, issues, opportunities, challenges, actions, websites, questions, and so forth. So that then you, in this grid then, you click on one of these cells, and it says, what is the current state of play of actions to address that biodiversity issue? So there'll be a statement, action number 1, action number 2, action number 3, and so forth. With each action will be a range of judgments collected from one-on-one interviews around the world from policymakers who are supposed to have the responsibility to do that action. Because they might want to say, that action won't work until we get a standard definition by scientists around the world. Until this time, the business community won't back this policy because there's not an even playing field. Precise, crisp. So that we have a whole bunch of those sort of comments into like a paragraph or two around each action. Now, where we're at this point is that we collect all this information about the actions and descriptions of problems through repeating questionnaires so that every year it sort of culminates into the next set of stuff, and then we produce an annual state of the book. Annual state of the book, that's right. Annual state of the book is this. This is the annual state of the book. That's correct Freudian slip. Next year there'll be another state, which may not be a state of the book, because it may have to be a state of the CD-ROM and a better executive summary, because it's very intimidating walking into a Prime Minister's office and say, read that, that's your homework, because you go for the cabinet meeting tomorrow. However, that becomes an excuse, a deadline for us to get stuff together. So it's a mechanism for the management. We would like to move in the process of this to not only use the questionnaires to collect them in a batching way, and the interviews to get the judgment in a batching way, which is becoming rather large, and there's a lot of information in this system, and it's a lot for anybody to get even close to digesting, even if they know what they're looking for. So we'd like to, in a sense, do some of what you were talking about here. We've got it up there right now, so the person can go through each year what the questionnaires were, who played, all of the information is there. So you have it. So you got the grid like this, but it's also timed out year by year, so you can actually see how the accumulation of the knowledge has gone. What I'd like to do, in addition to what we're doing now, so you're getting an upgrading right here, is to have on there the ability for anybody to click on, read it, and say, that position is not correct today. There is now a new capacity that you don't know about. So there would be an option, and hopefully within this year we may do this, an option like a mail to function. The person then clicks that on, says, here's how to change that. But it doesn't go to a person. It goes to a preset listserv within the Millennium Project of a set of both identified and self-identified experts on that issue around the world. Because our stuff, unlike most of the stuff that's going on today, is trying to be intercultural, interinstitutional, and interdisciplinary. By interinstitutional, I mean they're private sector, they're UN, they're businesses, they're corporations, they're government people, they're religious leaders, they're NGOs. So it's a cross-section of cultural orientations, as well as the normal cultural sort of, Europeans versus Americans and that sort of stuff. So we would have a peer group, in a sense, set of individuals, 12 or 13 or something like that, who that piece of email would go to. There would be a chair. The chair would have a month to collect the views from the other folks that may want to query that person back on something. So they have an ad hoc working group on it. Then when they come to the conclusion that that's the position, or if they can't get to a position, then it once again, like the Millennium Project, says, all right, here's the range of 3 opinions on that. So we don't have to know the truth. Great thing about philosophy I learned as a kid, you don't have to know the truth, but you've got to be clear about your confusion. So we could put that back up there. So when you then click there next time, it says, here's the other stuff, here's it, and here's the evolution of that. So this is that dynamic. This is our approach to that dynamic modeling so far. And one of the things that I'm interested in here and learning about the next set of speakers soon is how do we take the best that you all are discussing and try it out. This is where we become a guinea pig in different cultures, because we have nodes in places like Tehran, Tokyo, Madurai, India, Australia, about 11 of these things around the world. There are really different kinds of locations, and each one is slightly different. They're supposed to be, not in all cases, but they're supposed to be a little microcosm of the whole thing, that they're part government, they're part UN, they're part corporation, they're part university, and they're part NGO. So we're trying to also create a new organizational space from which new kinds of behaviors can emerge. They then can not only be a source of new thoughts for the bootstrapping things, but also be a place to try them out. Why don't I pause and I'll take a couple questions. Yes, ma'am.
How do you know you hear all the voices, for example?
We don't hear all the voices. We don't hear all the voices. We don't pretend to hear all the voices. We are not doing statistical polling. We're not in a position to say the average human thinks this. That's Gallup's job. We don't do that. If we were to do something on the future of physics in 1905, we might have interviewed 2 people and that would have been sufficient. Maybe 3. All right? So we're not looking for that. What we're looking for is what is a reasonable range of well-informed judgment. I've worked in a lot of countries in the world, and this philosophic fiction about making sure that you have this person represented, this person represented. Well, this person got his education at Stanford. They came back to India. So what you're hearing is a Stanford professor's thing, not necessarily India. So our approach to that is to create these cross-diverse nodes that are really different themselves, so the people that they pick and also allow them to be found. They then represent a range of views. Is that all of the views on the earth? No. Do we want to have all the views on the earth? I'm not sure. It may be too much. What we'd like to do is have all the views that have been vetted by a range of people and scrubbed over. So it's not a Gallup. So no, we don't have the ambition to do that. What we're trying to do is to help the human species think together about the future in a well-informed way as efficiently as we can. The UN General Assembly is one approach. One could argue about its efficiency. So no, we're not trying to collect all the views. If somebody says the earth is flat, we're not going to write it in. We're just not going to do that.
Talk some more on didactic.
Yeah.
Question?
Yes.
It seems to me that simply gathering, an idea of what's best even is maybe not quite it. For example, look at sorting algorithms. There are many different sorting algorithms. Each one is essentially a deterministic output for many input variables. And depending, which one is best for a given application depends on what the inputs are and what the desired outputs. And so it seems to me that you're really, the best case would be to, if you could identify unambiguous outcomes of many inputs.
Okay, one of the ways we're attempting to begin to struggle with that is we have also an experimental node in Maui, at the Maui High Performance Computing Center out there with some folks. I mean, obviously we got the project wrong. I'm in Washington and the computer's in Hawaii. It should be the reverse. But anyway, so you can see some weaknesses in the management right off the bat. And what we're looking at is creating a cyber game. And if you can imagine a piece of paper folded in half. On this side is a game. And on this side is people with day-to-day working who, as far as they're concerned, are not playing a game, but with real problems in the world and so forth. On this side, in the middle, we have all this knowledge that we're accumulating in actions and various situational stuff. And a person can come into here. This is where we're in a design. Someone wants to design with us. We'd be happy to do this. So someone comes into play, this world game, and they're going to blow out this problem, whatever it is, whether it's prejudice, whether it's a war situation, whether it's AIDS, whatever it is, they're going to blow up this sort of thing. And they have certain strategies to do that. And they get graded by the preset knowledge base over here on how well they're doing at it. When they get to a point where you don't know, you're up to the top of the thing in a particular area, you hook through to reality, i.e. you win reality, so to speak. So let's say that you have come up with a new strategy to beat the virus in the AIDS thing that has not been thought of before, and this person over here, this is a little bit like that little expert groups. So these people have pre-programmed themselves. They're saying, I am working on AIDS, this is where we are, these are the things we can solve, this is where I think the next ideas are that we need. You find somebody like that in the world, I don't care who they are, I want to talk to them right then. So when that person gets to that point with a new strategy, that person hasn't, it comes up, there's nothing matching there. Boom, up this comes, it's communicated to that person. Now, why would these people play on this side? Because if you had a world screen system to get the person who had the knowledge that you needed, whether it's a taxi cab driver or a president, doesn't matter, then you might very well want to take the time to define your problem in such a way that is compatible to the game. Got the idea? So that's one way we want to struggle that way. Because then you can do this universal knowledge stuff, the general stuff, but extremely precise at the same time through the game. And that's what Maui is sort of experimenting around. They're not a formal node yet, but they're sort of playing around with this for a while. It'll take some time. And we're thinking about doing it in cooperation later, a few years, with Coca-Cola, because they're coming out with a new distribution system. So we might want to have a game with the distribution. You heard it here first. But it's a few years down the road. Yes?
Do you have any, or have you given any thought to the kinds of features or functions you would like to see in a dynamic knowledge system? I mean, are you coming with any predefined expectations for what would be good?
Well, obviously I didn't communicate on that little visual slide because that was our beginning at it. Maybe I did need a slide after all. But that was the beginnings of it. One is that you could go in and you could find out the evolution of anything, how it got there, by the past. I mean, you really won't want to because it's too much damn stuff. But one could. They could go through the whole thing, the questionnaires, the rating systems, because these things are rated and vetted and cross-comment and all that sort of thing. You can go through all of that up to a point. You can also see how that fits into the rest of the world situation. What's its relationship to it? We're also in the process of collecting indicators right now on how do we measure progress on these questions. And disaggregating that regionally, how do you measure it in Russia versus how do you measure it in Buenos Aires? That's going on right now. And we're doing some interviews about that. How practical would that measure be for you, Mr. Chief of Strategy of Argentina? Would you respond to that indicator or not? And if not, then why not? So we're in that now. That's in play. Then we want to stick that back, upgrade this grid, the stuff underneath the grid. So it's where we are at this point. Now, if I'm really up for listening, where you would take that, the grid idea, we're calling it the futures matrix. For those of you who've seen the movie, a little paranoia helps focus the mind, So we're calling it the futures matrix for right now. But that's where, and you can go to our website, www.acunu.org. 3 minutes left? Okay. What's the best 3-minute question?
Yes.
Yes.
There's a lot of controversy about the World Trade Organization and lots of people having different views. I was interested that the domains that you listed actually didn't include economic activity and trade.
I didn't finish them all. Yes. One is international trade and wealth.
Because this seems like a great tool, in fact, to let all the voices be heard that are trying to be heard. And maybe people should talk about it more as a place to put all of those voices.
Yeah. All is a big word. Because also a politeness. One of the things I learned from a boss of mine when I worked overseas in development stuff, business, was the right information, the appropriate next step. Talk about appropriate technology. There's also appropriate information, appropriate knowledge, appropriate management. What's that next piece? And I'm real guilty with producing a book like this for crying out loud. I mean, that's a lot of stuff. And this is really distilled down. I mean, the actual stuff behind this is like this. But we really got to first. But I'm glad, yes, economics, trade and wealth. We're also wealth. We want to look at the future of wealth. Because if we have wealth the way we have it now today, you need 3 Earths. You need 3 Earths to maintain what we're doing. So we got to change the nature of wealth, and that's very much in the dialogue as well. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the concept of hearing everybody's voices and so forth. That's a long-standing thread in computer collaborative discussions. Usenet, email mailing lists, more recently web discussions. Very recently, the nerd news site Slashdot has been looking at that, where any time you allow a fully open discussion system, not all voices are constructive. You get flaming. You get people whose voice to be heard is that they want to basically interfere with the discussion.
That's right.
So you can't basically do it without filtering.
That's right. Our strategy on that so far is we have a listserv of people who are actually doing the work on the project. And, forgive me for whomever sees this, not everybody's there because I know some people are more verbose than others. So even though they're regular participants, they're not there. Sometimes we'll get our fingers burned, and that's just the nature of progress. The other is we have a public one. Anybody can go onto our website, self-select, they code on, and they want to do whatever they want to do. Now, we can delete them, and then they can re-sign. We can delete them, we can re-sign, and that's where that is. That's how we manage that in the moment. I saw a wave in the back in the, we're out of tape? Maybe he was just stretching.
We go off the air.
Yes?
Could you say anything about the effects you've seen so far? You've been gathering a lot of information now for a couple of years and condensing it and putting it out there. Have you seen that influencing decisions that are being made and processes?
Yeah. It's a real touchy business because I'll give you an example. The UN University did a study several years ago on the use of Japanese surplus for development. The next year, Japan's foreign assistance almost doubled. Now, Japan does not want to say, this is going out live, isn't it?
No. I think they just finished.
Oh, good. This was off the record. Japan does not want to say that the UNU made, influenced the decision. You'll see me in Siberia next month. It's very difficult. Decision makers don't want to be told, or don't want, they don't want to say that, this study did. It's a gentle process. When we do our interviews, one-on-one, that's also a briefing to that decision maker. It's part of the dynamic process. So not only are we saying, Mr. Decision Maker or Ms. Decision Maker, what's your view on this? This is a briefing. Okay? We've had UNDP did a bunch of stuff in development stuff. We're up. Okay, we're over the thing. We'll see. What? 1 minute? Or your finger's cold? What? Go like this. Is that it? Oh, there's 1 minute. Okay. What's the next 1 minute question? Yes.
The difficulty with inside group outside. Sorry, the difficulty with the inside group outside group is trying to extend that to open decision-making situations in which there is only the outside group, and doing the filtering for serious content versus all the rest. Have you touched any of that?
Yeah. People can move from the quote open system into the professional system. And the way that they do it is they fill out and do some of the work. They fill out the questionnaires or do some of the work. Now, our work is not easy. I mean, I can show you during the break one of our questionnaires on the indicators, and you fill that out. You do that. You have a right to walk through the door. So there is that system, At the same time, I was part of the New Jersey Institute of Technology I's experimental NSF system back in the 70s or whatever, and if somebody didn't act in a nice way, we deleted them. The person rarely talks to me to this day. But you get your fingers burned along the way to progress. Huh? What?
That's a good thing.
To get your fingers...
That they don't talk to you anymore.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes? All right. Sayonara. We'll see you in the future.
So we come back from the break.